Hello, folks, and welcome to this Microsoft Reactor session on automating your development with GitHub Actions. And it's a pleasure being with you here today. I hope that within the next hour, you're able to learn some things that will be very beneficial that you can take with you and leverage in your own DevOps workflows. So welcome. Glad to have you here. Glad to be here with you. So let's talk just quickly about what the reactors are. The reactors are technical sessions, opportunities for us as community members to come together and learn from one another, meet, connect, and hear about a lot of different new innovations in technology. It's a great combination of documentation, panels, and then demonstrations that can be very, very beneficial as we are all trying to absorb the changing landscape of technology that we come across on a daily basis. Excuse me. So we have multiple options available in terms of across the globe, which is another great feature of reactors. There are multiple locations and options in terms of accessibility. And so hopefully at some point we'll be able to start traveling again and meeting in person. But for now, this virtual session like this is a great opportunity for us to connect, as I said, as community members and really benefit from one another as we walk this technology journey. So welcome. Today's topic is on automating your development with GitHub Actions. So that's going to be our focus today. A little bit about me. My name's Alan Sanders. I am a senior cloud architect with about 25 plus years of experience in architecture, development, and design. I've worked in several verticals. I've worked in some large companies. I've worked in some small companies. I've done a lot of consulting. But really, for me, the key is I'm very passionate about learning. So one of the reasons why I like this this industry, is because every day when I wake up, there will be a new challenge, right? I don't foresee myself waking up and saying, hey, I figured it all out. There's nothing more for me to learn. So that's why I like this industry, and I like this opportunity to be with you folks today, right? Because I'm passionate about my own learning, and I'm passionate about learning for others as well. And that's what I hope you see with this. I hope you get a lot out of this. All right. So let's go ahead and talk briefly agenda, and then we'll kind of roll right into it. We're going to be going through sort of an introduction and talking about DevOps as a general concept. Then we're going to talk specifically about what are GitHub Actions, and we're going to talk specifically about what is a GitHub Actions workflow, which is really kind of the focus of our discussion today. We'll have a demo that we'll be able to walk through, and then we'll wrap up with a knowledge check and then some summary information. So we have about an hour together. We want to make sure that you are aware of the Q&A, right? So be sure you leverage the Q&A. Feel free to post questions to the session. And as we go through, I'll try to be monitoring for that. I'll try to prompt for questions as we proceed, but feel free to put those questions out there, and if they're contextual, we'll try to address them right away. Otherwise, we'll try to leave a couple of minutes at the end for additional questions as well. So let's go ahead and get going. So if we talk about software delivery in a general sense, right? Generally speaking, if we talk about software delivery, we have multiple goals, but three key goals that we have often with software delivery are agility, right? The ability to flexibly adjust to new technical or business innovation. We talk about quality and the importance of high quality with our software, right? We want our software to operate the way it's designed, and we want our software to operate without error. We want it to meet the need for which it was built. And then speed, right? So how quickly can we turn around new features, right? And continue to evolve a particular piece of software or system, right? So those three goals are often key goals that we have with software delivery: agility, high quality, and speed. And sometimes those can be competing goals, right? We might be able to be agile and fast, but maybe quality suffers. Or we might be able to focus intently on quality, but that slows the process down. What we're looking for is a comprehensive combination of these three things that work together in synergy. Why? Because these three things, key characteristics are basically these three things drive us to staying competitive, right? They are the difference between whether or not we're going to stay competitive. You have two businesses who are trying to develop the same type of product or service, and if one is innovating faster and delivering on that innovation faster than the other, they're going to set themselves apart from a competitive perspective. So these three goals are about helping us stay competitive in the delivery of our software, whether it be commercial software or business support software that we're building. So one of the concepts that we'll leverage here is, so we'll talk about DevOps. In the past, traditionally, you had the develop that built the code and the operations that monitored and managed the execution of the code in production, right? DevOps looks to be able to pull those two together, to break down silos between those two, because there are definite benefits in terms of that agility, quality, and speed to having a more comprehensive perspective on those two features, development and operations, right? One of the key concepts within DevOps is continuous integration. And key characteristics of continuous integration are really, it's about fully automating as much as possible our build and our test process, right? So we want to automate our build and our test. It's event triggered, so it usually triggers off of some type of activity within our repositories, right? Whether it be a code commit or a merge or a pull request creation. And what we really are looking for here is the ability to enable ongoing validation, right? If you imagine a team of developers all working on a common code base, we're going to each be working on our own features. And then at some point, though, all of those features need to come together, right? And we need to verify and validate that they all work together well. If we wait for that, right, if we're off on our separate paths building features, that set of features continues to grow, the set of changes continues to grow, so that if we wait too long, when we try to integrate, we're going to end up with potentially merge conflicts, or tests are going to break, or maybe the software. It's much harder to manage that merge across multiple activities if we wait, right? If we let those changes build up. Continuous integration aims to enable us to, on an ongoing basis, validate that those changes play nicely with the rest of the system, right? So as a developer, check something, depending on how your continuous integration pipeline is built. As developers check code in and that gets merged, you might kick off a process that will build, merge that into the rest of the software, build it as a whole, and then run tests that both validate the new changes as well as making sure that you didn't break any others, right? So any questions or comments about continuous integration? Okay, so a follow-up to continuous integration is continuous delivery, right? Key characteristics of continuous delivery is automating deployment, right? Continuous integration was automating build and test. Continuous delivery is about automating deployment. There are triggers, events, right, associated to continuous delivery as well, to know when that automated process should be kicked off. And usually it's triggered on the presence of a new build artifact. So as the build process, the continuous integration process completes, there's now a new build artifact available. The automated process in continuous delivery can pick up that new build artifact and deploy it to a target environment. And why is that beneficial? Well, that's beneficial because it allows us, depending on how we're configured, right? What we're trying to do is enable ongoing delivery of features and functionality, right? That speed, right? We want to be able to get the new features in front of users and available to users as soon as possible often, right? Why? Because A, there is benefit to having that new capability, and B, we want to be able to get feedback, right? We want to be able to get feedback from our users as quickly as possible, and then we can use that feedback to drive back into the process and either improve, maybe this application or improve the entire CI/CD process as a whole. So continuous delivery, the two of these will often work together, and they work together well. So with CI/CD, we will have often a continuous integration process that is automating our build and our test to ensure quality, and then is transferring to a continuous delivery or deployment is another sort of nuance. Continuous delivery path or mode to start releasing that software. And then if you've ever seen the DevOps infinity diagram, right? It basically is a continuous process. We plan, design, build, test, deploy, run, operate, monitor, and then from all of that, we're able to gather feedback that we can push back into the process for continuous improvement. So that's what we're talking about here, right? We're going to be talking about the mechanics of GitHub Actions and the GitHub Actions workflow, but the foundation upon which those things are built and where they're leveraged and why they are important is this concept of DevOps, this concept of CI/CD. So again, any questions, please feel free, or comments, please feel free to post those to the chat, and we can address those as they come in. So introduction, a little bit about DevOps. Let's talk now about the specifics of GitHub Actions. So what are GitHub Actions? GitHub Actions are basically just reusable packaged scripts that are event-driven, right? They can be kicked off in response to a specific event, and they're used to automate tasks in our software development workflow, but specifically in GitHub, right? Think about GitHub Actions as akin to, DevOps, Azure DevOps pipelines and actions there, or Jenkins, right? Similar concepts, right? We're building actions that we can piece together to automate specific tasks in our software development workflow, but within GitHub, right? So this is within GitHub. GitHub Actions are exposed and made available. GitHub Actions are exposed and made available either as in the GitHub Marketplace, right? People can develop those, build those, and publish them for others to use, or you can create your own actions, right? And we're going to look at that here in the demo. So we had a question come in. How does GitHub Actions compare to Azure DevOps pipelines, especially with regard to the Power Platform? Well, similar concepts. It's just the mechanisms by which you're going to implement are going to be a little different, right? We're going to see here within GitHub Actions, the mechanics that we use to set up the actions, the mechanics that we use to set up the workflows, how we trigger them. That's going to be very specific to GitHub and to this particular platform, and we'll drill into a little bit of that. but the concepts are very much the same, right? In Azure DevOps, in pipelines, as activities occur, as a push occurs on a given branch, we can trigger a build pipeline to execute, and then we can follow that up as an artifact gets dropped to a release pipeline as a follow-up, right? So the mechanics of developing and building these out are going to be different. They're going to be specific to the different platforms, but the concepts are the same, right? The ability to automate our workflow, but here specifically within GitHub. So two types of custom actions if we wanted to create our own, right? The two types of custom are container and JavaScript, right? So we can create two different types, again, within GitHub, and we'll look at the mechanics of doing that here shortly. So container actions are built using a containerization technology like Docker, right? So just like we can use Docker to containerize our applications, our systems, here we're using a container to containerize the GitHub action itself, right? So that's the difference, but it's still a container, right? We're going to build it in Docker, and it's going to enable us, right? The key about containers is the ability to package up the environment, runtime dependencies, and the code, all as a self-contained reusable unit of execution, right? So container actions give us the ability to build up that environment dependency and code combination, right? And then the benefit of containers, one of the other benefits of containers, is that we avoid environment drift or environment differences. It helps us avoid the, well, it ran fine on my machine, because what we're looking for is everything to be self-packaged, right? So that's one option, the container actions. Some limitations, right? If you go the container action route, that can only be run in a Linux environment hosted by GitHub. And we'll touch briefly upon our ability to specify different runners for our actions and for our jobs, including the ability to do your own runners. But if you're going to go the container action route, then it has to be executed in a Linux environment hosted by GitHub. But it does support multiple languages, right? With containers, because you're packaging everything up together, right? It's self-contained. It supports .NET, Node, PHP, Python, C#. Java. So container actions, all right. And then secondarily, the other type of action that we can create is a JavaScript action. So as the name implies, these are JavaScript based. But these don't include the environment, right? These don't include the environment. They require you to specify your execution environment when you want to run these actions against your workflows. And so you take on some responsibility of specifying your execution environment that the container base would take on for you, but you get the flexibility of being able to support other types of environments, Linux, Mac OS, and Windows as well. So let me pause there for just a moment. Any questions or comments about container actions versus JavaScript actions? Okay. So what is a GitHub Actions workflow, right? So we've talked about the GitHub Actions themselves, these reusable scripts that are leveraged to automate specific tasks against our repository, right? Against our software development and delivery workflow. Well, a GitHub Actions workflow is basically the combination of those things, right? It allows us to combine those actions and those activities into a more comprehensive set of activities that we want to run in response to something like a merge of code or a push of code to the repository. So the workflow allows us to combine actions, right, into a more comprehensive set of capabilities. It's an automated procedure, right? But this is going to be added to your repository, right? You're going to add this workflow to your repository using a defined convention by GitHub. It's going to be coded using YAML, and it's going to be created in a directory called .github/workflows. And what it does is basically it defines a trigger, a job set. That job set can contain tasks. Those tasks can execute actions, the GitHub actions we just talked about. And then you can define runners as far as agents that should host and execute your jobs. So conceptually, if we look at a simple example here, we have a workflow that has a single job, check-bats-version. This job has 4 different steps. 2 of those steps execute actions, right? And then 2 of those steps execute command line statements. And then for this workflow, there's going to be an event that triggers it, right? This is what automates the initiation of the workflow within a given repository. And there are multiple things that you can use for triggers, right? A push to any branch, a push to a specific branch, a PR. So there are multiple activities that you can respond to. But that event is going to be what is used to trigger the execution of the automated workflow against your repository. So if we take this conceptual workflow definition or layout here and actually translate it to the associated YAML that you would use to define it, it would look something like this. So our workflow would have a name, right? learn-github-actions. Here is our trigger, so on push, and because we're not specifying a branch, it's going to be on push to any branch in the repository. Here we're going to define 1 or more jobs. This only has a single job, but you can define multiple jobs. You could define a build job and then a test job, for example. For each job, you're going to designate what type of an agent that job should run on, right? Here we're saying it should run on the latest version of Ubuntu. And then it's going to have a set of steps defined, right? And some of those steps, as I said, might use actions, either custom actions or published actions in the marketplace. Or you can run, command line statements like installing a global dependency called bats, right? And then checking the version of that dependency as part of the action execution, right? And then that output could be used to feed into another step. Now you can create dependencies. So typically, if you have multiple jobs defined, the workflow is going to execute them in parallel. However, as you can imagine, there might be times where you have a dependency between those jobs, right? Your build job, you might want that to complete successfully, right? Before you move into your test job. And so you can actually create a dependency between your jobs such that they will, rather than run in parallel, will run sequentially. But that's as you get into a little bit more of GitHub actions and the workflows, you'll be able to see kind of some of those capabilities. We're not going to have time to drill into all of that today, right? We're going to be looking at pretty much a foundational aspect of this, right? What does it look like to create a GitHub action? What does it look like to create a GitHub action workflow, sort of foundationally, with some pretty straightforward activities, right, against a repository? But the idea then would be building on top of that foundation and adding additional, more complicated capability. So if there are any questions about the GitHub action workflow or GitHub actions, definitely feel free to please post those questions to chat, and we can address as they come in. But otherwise, let's go ahead and look at a demo, right? And for this demo, we're going to be walking through one of the modules in a Microsoft Learn learning path. So I've included the link here. I'm going to launch that. Pull this onto my main monitor. And so this Microsoft Learn platform is really nice, right? It provides a nice combination of documentation, right? Context-aware documentation with tutorials and some walkthroughs that you can execute. And then it really provides sort of a comprehensive view of multiple technologies, right? So one of the ones that we're going to be looking at here, I mean, what we're looking at here today is GitHub Actions and the GitHub Action workflow, right? But there are a ton of other topics that you can find within Microsoft Learn. So definitely a valuable, yeah, let me grab that link if you want to follow along. You can definitely follow along if you want. So looking through this, right, there are several modules in this specific learning path. The first one is the introduction to GitHub. The second one is what we're going to be focusing on today. But at the end, I'm going to encourage you to actually go back and work through the entire set. We're only going to have time to focus on this one. And again, we're looking to establish a strong foundation for our GitHub Actions and GitHub Action workflows. But there are multiple key items here that you could walk through that would be very beneficial. The other cool thing about Microsoft Learn is you can actually earn points, right, as you walk through these activities. And then those points can be used to achieve trophies, which is kind of fun, right? So we're going to go to this second module, the automate development tasks by using GitHub Actions. And we've already sort of talked introduction and what GitHub Actions are, how they are used to conceptually to automate development tasks. We're going to go into this exercise, right? So the third unit here, this exercise unit. I'm going to click that. And basically what we're going to do is now be given the opportunity to walk through a GitHub Learning Lab module, right? GitHub Learning Lab is a pretty nice feature that walks you through step-by-step tutorials, right? And as you execute those steps, there will be a set of bots that are watching your activity on the repository. And as you complete a step, that bot will respond and either confirm that you completed it successfully, right, or provide you some feedback. And if you complete it successfully, it'll then present you with the next step, or it'll provide you with feedback to say, hey, I actually expected this, you might want to adjust, right? So it's just a nice way to sort of guide you through this tutorial and kind of confirm as you go that you are completing the steps correctly. So to launch this, I can start the Learning Lab right here on GitHub. If I click that button, it's going to bring me up to this GitHub Actions Hello World. This is the exercise that we are going to be executing. And to start, all I have to do is click Start Free Course. So that's what I'm going to do. Now that's going to generate a new repository in my account called hello-github-actions, and it can be public or private. Now, with GitHub Actions and GitHub Action workflows, public repositories have much more, you have much more access and it's free, fully free, right? With private repositories, you have limitations around the number of minutes you have, and you might have to have a particular support agreement to get more minutes if you're dealing with private repositories. So we're going to keep this repository public, and then I'm just going to click to begin. It's going to clone that repository into my account and present me with a set of steps, right? These are the set of steps that we're going to be walking through as we proceed through this exercise. Now, I'm going to go to this first step, right? The first step, so we have a little bit more about GitHub Actions, which we've talked about, right? Ways to automate a lot of different things within our repository and our DevOps workflows. We talked about the fact that there are two different types, right? Container and JavaScript. We're going to be creating a container action with this exercise. And with this exercise, we're going to be creating both the action itself and then a workflow that uses it. Now, a couple of things here. You're actually able to execute these steps right in GitHub, right? You can execute these steps in GitHub and follow along. And feel free to do that if you want while I walk through it. But you can also execute these steps in an external tool like Visual Studio Code, right? The nice thing is I push changes to Visual Studio Code to my repository. The bots that sit behind GitHub Learning Lab can still monitor, see those activities occur, and respond. So I'll flip back and forth between Visual Studio Code and GitHub, but recognize that you could actually execute these steps right here from within GitHub itself. Okay, so let me first of all bring up the code view. I'm going to create a new, and this is what the step indicates for us to do, right? Is to create a new branch. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a new branch called first. Make sure that I'm selected on that branch here, and I'm going to grab the URL for cloning. I'm going to use Windows Subsystem for Linux running an Ubuntu image on my Windows 10 machine. I'm going to navigate into my source folder and then there into my repos folder. And then I'm going to clone that repository. Okay. Once I've done that, I can now navigate to the folder and I can type code dot to launch Visual Studio Code. And we will be right on that folder, right on that new folder that just got created from the clone. Give it a moment here. All right, so empty, don't really have much here, right? Just the license and the README. I'm gonna switch the branch to first action, right? That's the branch we want to operate off of. And the first step is going to be to create our Docker file, right? So let me create a new folder. And this is going to be used to house our custom GitHub action. Within this folder, I'm going to create a new file called Docker. And rather than have you watch me type, because we don't really have time for that, nor is that very interesting, I'm going to, from the step here in GitHub Learning Lab, I'm going to copy that code and paste it here into the video code. And the Docker file, right, just like with applications that are containerized, is used to define an image from which a container will be built, right? And that container is going to be used to house and execute our GitHub action in this case. So we have a base image, this Debian tag 9.5-slim. We're going to simply add a new script, entrypoint.sh, into the container when it's created. We're going to change its permissions so that it becomes executable. And we're then going to launch as the entry point into this script when that container spins up. And so that's defining sort of the steps around the container that's going to be, that's setting up the container, if you will, the infrastructure that is going to be used to host our action. So I'm going to save this. And then with GitHub Learning Lab, what I can do is stage this change, add a commit message, add initial Docker file. Make sure that I don't have any errors, and then save. And so what we will see over here as I sync, I'm then going to create for this, I'm going to create a pull request because that's called out in the steps, right? I'm going to create a pull request from my branch. I'm going to call it GitHub action and workflow, and then I'm going to create it. And so you see here the bots sitting behind GitHub Learning Lab are now picking up on that activity and will shortly give me a success message, which it did here, right? Nice work. You committed a Docker file using the steps that were provided in step 1. The next thing we want to do is add that entrypoint.sh, right? So we've said the Docker file is going to utilize an entrypoint.sh script, but that doesn't exist right now. So I'm going to go out here and within my action-a folder, create a new file called entrypoint.sh. Again, rather than you watch me type, I am going to copy the code from here and paste it here. And this is fairly straightforward. All it's going to do, right, not super exciting in terms of what we're automating against our repository, but it, again, hopefully helps you see the foundation, right? And the foundation is you can piece these scripts together, right, and then shell out, for example, to a command that simply echoes a message, right? Now you'll notice this this syntax here. One of the things we can do is define inputs that can be varied at runtime on our actions. And so workflows that use this action can specify the value for that input as part of the workflow definition. And then when it executes, it will leverage that input information. So we've got our initial entrypoint.sh. Let me save that. I'm going to stage this. Sync. And so we're doing a lot of, sort of commit by commit, but that commit is what triggers the bot in the GitHub Learning Lab to pick up and see that something has occurred, right? So nice work on adding that entrypoint.sh script. All we're really doing is outputting the message. The next thing we're going to do is add metadata to define our action, right? So I'm going to, from here, I'm going to add a new file called action.yaml. Again, all within this folder that is being used to define our custom GitHub action. I'm going to copy this code. Now, briefly at what this is doing, right? It's giving it a name and a description, an author. We're just going to leave that alone. Here's where we define that input, right? There's going to be an input called my name, which, if you remember, goes back to this, right? So we're able to feed that input through the action at runtime, right? It's going to be a required input, but we're going to default it to world. And then it's going to run using Docker, and the image is going to be this Docker file that we created. right? We have some branding information at the bottom here, an icon and a color, because if we were going to publish this action to the GitHub Marketplace, we would want a name and description so that people could find it, and then this would allow us to customize the look and feel on the Marketplace, right? So we're not doing that with this step, but you at least see the information there and kind of how you might be able to vary that. This, and again, stage this. Edit and sync. And you see the bot picks up and says, nice work. So now we're going to go to step 4, which is defining our workflow, right? So we built the GitHub action. All the GitHub action is going to do is use a container-based action to echo a message using an input that can be specified at runtime. But now what we need to do is the thing that actually gets triggered on a repository is a workflow, right? So we need to create the workflow and piece together the actions that we want to execute in response. So I am going to here, and again, by convention, I need to create a new folder called .github. And within that folder, I need to create a new folder called workflows. And then within that workflows folder, I'm going to create a new file just called main.yaml. Grab, excuse me, let me grab this code here. And so here is our initial workflow definition, which just includes a name and a trigger, right? On push to any branch in this repository, it will execute this workflow, which doesn't currently do much of anything, right? But this is just one of the steps that the lab walks you through, so we'll leverage this as is. Let me save this. And now I'm going to stage this change. Add initial workflow, edit, and synchronize. We're letting the GitHub Learning Lab bots kind of catch up and review. Responded, hey, great, you added a workflow, and it sort of describes the couple of data points that we've included there, right? But we really haven't included anything that's going to execute any activity, right? There are no jobs defined within this workflow. And so to make this workflow useful, right, we actually need to add some definition of jobs. So I'm going to copy this code, and then I'm going to add it here, right? And for this job, there's only going to be one job. Here's our label for it, build. Here's a main hello world action that we can use for review in our logs. It's going to run on the latest version of Ubuntu, which, since it's a container-based action, that needs to be the case. And then we are going to include a couple of steps. The first step is a community-delivered step or action called checkout, right? And anytime, you'll see this one very common in your workflows, if you're going to be doing a build, you want to pull the code from the repository into your agent to execute against, right? And that's what this action will do. It'll check that code out and make it available in the agent for executing additional steps as part of the workflow. And these actions, and this is very similar to what you see in Azure DevOps, for example, there are versions associated to it, right? And there are different ways to reference the versions based on tag versus based on SHA. And in the documentation for GitHub Actions, you can see why one is better than the other. SHA is really the only way to ensure that you're using just that specific version, right? That the tag doesn't get changed out from underneath you. And then we're also going to include a step, which is our custom workflow, right? It's just a path-based access to this action-a folder that we created with the ability to specify the value for our input property, right? Our input variable, Mona. We'll leave it at Mona for now. That's our workflow, right? So when a push occurs to any branch on this repository, this job will execute, okay? So let me save this. Come over here, stage this change. And then let me synchronize. Now what we'll see here is something kind of interesting. Step 6 says, hey, great, you added that action block, right? There's a sort of a description of the pieces that we sort of already talked through. But the action has been triggered. Why? Because we pushed code to the repository, right? We pushed code to the repository, which automatically triggered the workflow. And we're going to give it a bit here, and then it'll tell us that, hey, it now sees the results of that activity in GitHub. And you can find that same thing at the top here, right? This Actions tab. If I click the Actions tab, you see that I have two executions of the workflow. The first one failed. The reason it failed was because we didn't have any jobs defined, but it still executed, right? Because we had a trigger that said on push, run the workflow. The second one, though, is the one that we actually care more about. All right, so here's our hello world action, right? Here we can actually see the activity that's occurred as part of that workflow. Job setup, right? The checkout, that checkout action, right? And then here's our custom action, which again doesn't do much in the way of interesting, but it just echoes hello world, my name is Mona. So we can see that our custom action is being executed as part of this workflow on push to the repository. So quickly, what I want to do is just show you a slight adjustment to this. So like a tweak that just illustrates kind of how other ways that you can apply this. So I'm going to go and actually bring up our code, bring up my pull request. Bottom here, I'm going to merge that pull request, confirm the merge, and then delete the branch. Now, it says it created a new issue, right? Great, we got our congratulations message. One thing to note is that the workflow executed again, right? Because even though we closed a pull request that included a merge, a push to the master branch, right? And because of that, we see here under actions that merge, right? So that's going to execute, walk us through the various steps. And again, all we have is this hello world, my name is Mona. Well, let's do one additional thing here to sort of add a nuance. I'm going to create a new branch, and this is just a quick thing, so it won't take too long. But I'm going to create a new updates branch. All right, and then I'm going to go over here and do a git fetch to make sure that I have the latest branches. Close that terminal, and then now I can switch to the updates. And so I'm going to make two quick changes here, right? I'm going to change this to my name, right? Just to demonstrate that we can modify. In the Docker file, I'm going to change this up a little bit. I'm going to add a launcher.sh script. I'm going to change its properties to be executable as well. And then instead of using entry point as my entry point, I'm going to use launcher as my entry point. Okay. And then what I need to do is actually add the launcher script. For this launcher script, I'm going to start with that. I'm going to echo a command executing launcher, and then I'm going to execute the entry point.sh script. So I'm launching, the entry point is going to be the launcher script. It's going to echo one message, but you can actually use that to wrap another script as well. So we'll get both of these. So I'm going to save that and then check in or stage all changes here. Let me hit and sync. And again, because we are pushing to a branch, right? Update is a branch here. We will see an additional execution of our workflow, right? And here's that execution. Here is, as it proceeds, we'll start to see the various steps. Here you see the Docker image being built. And then you see here, executing launcher and hello world, my name is Alan. So, gives you just a little bit of a view of what you can do here. Again, not super complicated or complex, not very useful if you would, right? Those activities that we're doing there against the workflow, the repository, but it does hopefully provide you with a nice foundation around what you can do with GitHub and GitHub Actions and the GitHub Actions workflow. So let's go ahead and do a quick knowledge check. So one of the nice things about the Microsoft Learn activities and learning paths is it will include knowledge checks. So let's look at this real quick together. First question. What is the primary function of a GitHub action? Is it to automate software development tasks, to facilitate continuous integration and continuous delivery, integrate infrastructure as code within your project's context, or is it all of the above? And it's actually all of the above. That's some of the power that you have with GitHub Actions, right? You can do this and much, much more. What are the two types of actions? Is it container actions in JavaScript, embedded in container, or workflows and triggers? And again, we said the two types of actions that we have available when we're creating custom actions is the container and JavaScript. And then finally, which of the following could not be used as an event trigger or a runtime in our workflow? Is it making a commit, opening a new tab in your browser, merging a branch, or opening an issue? So if you look at these, the first, third, and fourth are all things that you can do within GitHub. Since those are all things that GitHub knows about as you complete them, those are actually valid triggers, right? The only one in this list that is not is this general sort of opening a new tab in your browser. If we check our answers, yay, you see that we got them right. So it's just a little bit of a knowledge. And again, as we sort of summarize here, and then I'm going to open it up for any additional questions. By way of summary, what did we cover, right? We covered CI/CD as a software delivery methodology, right? As DevOps, right? The importance of continuous integration, continuous delivery. We talked about GitHub Actions, both community and custom. And then we talked about GitHub action workflows. So what are some good next steps? What I would suggest, right, is that you work through the remaining modules in this learning path, right? There are multiple modules here that you can work your way through, including setting up a CI/CD and leveraging GitHub script, right? So I would strongly suggest that you walk through those other modules, right? And then also you might want to explore the GitHub action documentation that's available online, because it gives you a lot of good information about how you set up variables and dependencies, how you can manage secrets so that you don't check, like sensitive passwords or connection strings into your repository, but instead push them together with your code at time of workflow execution using a secrets mechanism. So those types of things are covered in that documentation. So the last thing, all right, so thank you there. Here's going to be a survey link, but we did get a couple of questions. So yes, so you could actually follow the GitHub actions in the background if you wanted. What will help us with the workflow? I think probably for this particular question, if your question is what help is available for creating the workflow, the GitHub action and workflow documentation is beneficial. This particular exercise, I think, will walk you through some of that as well. Can we run actions over multiple related repositories? Not directly, but indirectly you can, right? So there are ways to, basically you would have to leverage, not within GitHub, but you would have to leverage sort of separate processes, and those processes might execute scripts or additional utilities that would enable you to operate on another repository. But for the most part, GitHub actions themselves, the jobs are going to be scoped to that repository. But because you have multiple capabilities available to you from a programming and coding perspective, you can actually design that to integrate in multiple ways. It would just not be quite as straightforward as what we're doing here. All right, so here's a survey link. Please use that if you would, and use this event code 11634. This is helpful for us to kind of confirm that we're covering off on the right things for our community members, and that this is bringing value. And if there are things that we can do to improve, that's great. Before we close up, I just want to give folks another opportunity to ask any final questions in the last couple of minutes. Oh, I see. So the question is, how will a workflow help us? Why would we use them, right? Really, it's because if you want to create a pipeline that's going to automate a set of activities on push to your repository. So, in the continuous integration and continuous delivery, right, we want to be able to, on push of code, automatically build the system and test it, right? We can capture that activity in a workflow and then trigger it automatically on push of code to the repository. So it helps you because if you want to automate that build, test, and delivery, you can build that out in a workflow and trigger it off of a particular activity on the repository. There are also some nice features with workflows that allow you to test against multiple operating systems. You can use strategies and matrices to test against multiple operating systems or if you're leveraging Node, you can automatically run a workflow against multiple versions of Node. So if you want to see how each one would operate, so there's some capabilities like that. But it's really about automating this set of activities to either support primarily continuous integration or continuous delivery, this DevOps pipeline. Any final questions? Thank you for those questions. The later URL. Yes. And maybe the URL for the, just once again, this. Here was the and then the other documentation URL, which could be beneficial. Thanks for those questions. Very good questions. Any final questions before we wrap up? All right. If not, then it's been a pleasure being with you today. Again, hope you got a lot out of this, and please feel free to continue that journey, learning about GitHub Actions, GitHub workflows, and walk through that documentation. I think you'll find it very, very helpful. Hope you've enjoyed this. I have. I've enjoyed the opportunity to be with you, and I'm wishing you a great night or a great rest of your day. Thanks.